There are also some alternatives for white after e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, e5, knight b5, d6, c4, bishop e7. Not necessarily he needs to go for the lines that we have just seen. For example, Tyvyakov against Sveshnikov played bishop d3 immediately. For the time being, he is not showing where exactly the dark squared bishop will go, and his idea is in the line short castling. If now black tries to trade the bishops with h6, white wants to play b3 and to answer bishop g5 with bishop a3, hitting the pawn on d6. That's a bit unpleasant, but there is no need for us to do anything like that. We can simply proceed with the development, rook to c8, after which Tyvyakov insisted on his idea with b3. The move knight 1 to c3 will most probably transpose to the game Jerkovic against Sveshnikov that we have just seen. After a6, knight a3 and bishop g5, this is precisely the same. Knight c2, bishop takes c1, and then white is taking on c1, either with the queen like Jerkovic did, or with the rook like the game Spearman against Ikonnikov. That's simply transposition. But okay, b3 is also viable option for the first play, even though not very frightening for us, but it's playable. We need to know how to react. Do not be afraid if your opponent makes some new moves in the opening. By knowing the ideas and the schemes, the schematical way that we are developing our pieces, we can easily face this novice. Just think logically what exactly does he want, and then you will understand his idea, and you will find a way to develop your piece in the proper way. Knight f6, bishop b2, short castling, knight 1 to c3, sorry, knight 1 to c3, not knight 5 to c3, but knight 1 to c3. This knight is usually left on b5 because white wants to come on c2 and to defend the d4 square. If the other knight goes to c3, then we usually can occupy the square d4 at once and then prepare a6 and b5 anyways. There might be a problem with this knight, and this knight is not very certain where exactly is it going. So knight 1 to c3 was the game. a6, knight to a3, knight e8. Already thinking about the possible f5 move, and also releasing the bishop to come to a more active position here, concretely the g5 square. Even though we are not trading this bishop for the one on b2, it is still very useful for us to activate this piece. Knight c2 was played here. No, sorry, first knight d5, bishop g5, now knight came to c2, and knight e7. We're fighting against this knight, trying to force a trade. Especially convenient it will be if we trade it on d5 to take away the square from the white pieces, the stronghold. Knight e3 was played into the game, as otherwise if Tyvyakov doesn't do this, if he trades himself on e7, it will be very difficult for him to reach the d5 square, as this bishop is activated on g5, and it can even take on e3, or black can simply defend himself with knight c7, oops, not that much, and then proceed with his typical play with g6 and f5. Well, knight to e3, knight takes d5, c takes d5 was played. Probably this is stronger, knight takes d5, but then knight f6. Black is consistently destroying the pieces on the d5 square, and say after Knight takes f6, bishop takes f6. It is not easy for white to make use of the d5 stronghold. There are no more knights, this bishop on d3 cannot go there, and black is intending to simply bring the bishop back on g5, then g6, and f5 start his usual play on the king's flank. And we shouldn't forget that there is also the b5 idea somewhere in the air, although in this concrete position I would rather like not to do it, maybe just play on the king's flank. Okay, c takes d5 was the course of the game, bishop d7, and just a quick look at the positions. Such positions can arise from the real opus. The difference is that the pawn is on b7. This difference is in our favor, usually because the pawn on b5 is an object of an attack. Here it is on b7, it is too far away from the white pieces. Also it can arise from the king's Indian. The only difference is that in the king's Indian this bishop stays on g7 and hits its own pawn, while here it is active on g5. So compared to these two openings, black is very comfortable. He is having excellent prospects, and it's much easier for him to conduct g6 and f5. He can also support it with the knight on g7, then for white to conduct g3 and f4. Just a couple of more moves again. Queen e2, g6 was was played, sorry, g3, bishop h3, knight to g2. Well, white really likes to prepare f4, that's why Sveshnikov went back with the bishop to f6. This is also very nice. Bishop to h6, intending to meet f4 with a trade, and then he can bring this knight to h5 and to attack the pawn on f4. Maybe even trade on g2, and after that just bring the pieces to attack on the dark squares, once that the knight is off the g2 square. Anyways, bishop f6 was played, rook a to c1, bishop g7, rook takes c8, queen takes c8, bishop takes c8 was also very interesting, rook c1, queen d8, knight e3, bishop d7, also bishop a6 was interesting, but okay, the bishop is no longer needed here. In fact, it might be in danger there because of the threat g4 to trap it with queen f3 and to take it. Therefore bishop d7 is reasonable, already threatening f5. White managed to play for himself, and after e takes f4, g takes f4, knight f6 with the idea rook e8 and knight h5. Black's active piece play was more valuable than the center of white. In fact, this center turned out to be a weakness rather than an asset, and later on black went to win. So what do we need to know about this line with bishop d3? We just simply develop our pieces. We don't hurry with the trade of the bishop on g5, but we can do it in a later stage. We can just appear on g5 with the bishop once that we have finished the development.